All right, we are back. This is another Torah talk. If you were with us last time, we're going through the book of Genesis. We started in Genesis 1. I made allusion to this map that's right in front of you. And this time, I want to just give a brief overview of Torah and how I came to use this as my map for Torah. Uh, as I alluded to, I went through this process of deconstruction and reconstruction where I began to realize that we've been lied to about a lot of things. And I wanted to be able to examine the document that I was building my whole life on and the things that I assumed to be true that I was building my life on. And I wanted to re-examine it brick by brick. So I went back to the Bible, literally back to page 1. I cleared out the theology that was in my mind. I literally got rid of a library full of books. And I started saying, okay, given the tools that I currently have, can I listen to what the Torah has to say on its terms? And this map is was the product of that exactly. So this is my attempt in this specific video. I'm hoping it functions as a reference. Hopefully, it won't go too long, but I'd like it to be a reference for you, the listener, to be able to go back anywhere in the Torah. If you're in Numbers or if you're in Leviticus, you should be able to go back and look where you are in the text, and you should be able to see and feel where you are situated and what's going on the 30,000-foot view, the big story, as you examine the little pieces to the big story. Hopefully that makes sense. So, as I had mentioned before, I started with the big question: what is Torah? I've been told what it is. It's the word of God, or it's the law, or it's all these different things. But what is it on its terms? And what becomes very, very obvious to me is that, yes, the word Torah means law, but it might be better understood as Yah, or the Most High, or God's instruction for his people. Now, in our connotation, law seems and feels very rigid. And if you go and read a law book, it's a whole bunch of statutes and that's it. But in the Torah, what you get is mostly narrative, mostly stories, mostly dialogue, and you get a lot of instruction in terms of statutes, laws: do this, don't do that, don't wear this, don't go there, don't act like this. But it's in the context. Every one of those things is in the context of a greater story that's being told. So if we're going to understand the statutes, if we're going to understand the instruction that the Most High has given us, then we've got to understand the story that we're in. So I started back over. As I had mentioned before, when you look in the text, in the Hebrew text, the very first word of Genesis is Bereshit, and it means in the beginning. But the problem is that it's missing basically a vowel point that would be the definite article, and that's the word the. So instead of saying in the beginning, it's saying in beginning. So I started asking the question from the very start. I started asking the question: in beginning, what? Is Genesis about the beginning of the world? And the answer emphatically is no. Genesis is not about the beginning of the world. Genesis is about the beginning of a family. And that's very easy to understand when you let the Bible speak for itself. Look at Genesis 1. This is the outline of Genesis that I made. Bereshit, or in beginning. Bereshit, that's the Hebrew name for the book of the Bible, Bereshit. We call it, English, they call it Genesis. Hebrew, it's Bereshit, which means in beginning or in the beginning. But again, the word in the beginning, the very first word of the Bible, it's missing the vowel point that would be the definite article. So it's in beginning. In beginning, what? In beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and all of these things. The story starts very, very, very rapidly. And I started to examine what's called the antediluvian world, creation, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, the fall of man, where the serpent tricks the man and the woman into eating the fruit, and the world becomes cursed. Genesis 4 and 5, where the spread of man happened, and these two important genealogies that we'll get to later happen. Then chapter 6, the fall of the Watchers, or the fall of the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, and the creation of what's called the Nephilim, with no explanation. Genesis 7 through 9, Noah and the flood story. And if you know about other mythologies, other ancient cultures, there's whole books written talking about the flood and what happened and who the key players were. So for the Bible to only take 3 chapters to talk about the flood is very interesting. Then Genesis chapter 10, the table of nations, where Noah gets off of the boat and he has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and it goes through the lineage of those 3 sons, and the total of people that the world gets repopulated through is 70 people, which that number 70 becomes very, very important. In fact, by the time the book of Exodus starts, when it talks about the 12 tribes, it mentions specifically that there were 70 people that went into Egypt from the 12 tribes. It's a reference back to the Table of Nations. We'll get to that. And then Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. And in the Tower of Babel, there's only either 6 or 9 verses total given to this event. And the event is that people rebelled against God. God says, do this. They do the opposite. They, instead of going out and doing what God says, they decide to build a tower up to make a name for themselves. The word name in Hebrew is Shem. They want to make a Shem for themselves. God is not okay with that. He destroys this tower and spreads them out. But then he takes a man named Shem, whose name means name or reputation. So there's some people that want to make a reputation for themselves. God says, no, spreads all of the population over the earth, confuses their tongues. Then he takes a man named Shem, and from Shem comes Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. This is a very intentional allusion. This is a very intentional artistic illustration that the Most High has given us in His Word. And the big point is simply this: there's a lot of things that go on in Genesis 1 through 11, but it's only 25% of the whole Torah. I mean, it's only 25% of the book of Genesis. And when you begin to read other the supplemental literature, like the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees, you realize that Genesis 1 through 11 is really in bullet point form. It assumes you as the listener have a lot of information already about the Watchers, about the Nephilim, about what was going on with Noah and the flood, about what was going on with Abraham and Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. There's a lot of other information that it assumes that you already have. So in order to get where it's trying to go, specifically to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's giving you these important bullet points: how the world was created, how man was made in God's image, how the man fell and the earth and the serpent were cursed, how the fall of the water, all these things, all these are important bullet points that essentially say, how did the world get so messed up? That's Genesis 1 through 11. How did the world get so messed up? And then Genesis 12 through 50 is God's solution. How is God going to fix how messed up the world is? And the answer is the patriarchs: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Genesis 1 is not about the creation of the world. Otherwise, there'd be way more details about it, and way more details about the serpent and the Watchers and the Nephilim and the Tower of Babel. And there's other books that go into to give greater clarity about that. But the book of Genesis is about the beginning of a family. In beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In beginning what? In beginning the family of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And you can see right here, all of these are rough estimations. They're not exact, but I was just trying to put these things in categories that made sense and that I could comprehend. And so roughly Genesis 1 through 11 is roughly 25% of the narrative. Genesis 12 through 50 is roughly 75% of the narrative. That's a big deal. In fact, the life of Joseph, how Israel got into Egypt in the first place, the life of Joseph, chapters 37 through 50, is more than all this material covered in the antediluvian world. So the author of Genesis is way more concerned about you knowing about Joseph and how Israel got into Egypt than he is about you knowing about the Watchers, the Tower of Babel, the serpent, creation, all of those things. He's more concerned with you getting these details about Joseph than all of those things combined. That's pretty striking. Then when we come to the book, so that's the book of Genesis. In beginning what? In other words, how this all started. And the first part is how everything got messed up. And then 12 through 50 is what is God's plan for redeeming the world? What's God's plan? And we begin to see his plan is to go through a man named Shem. These people are trying to make a reputation for themselves, a Shem for themselves, and it's totally self-destructive. So God destroys it, spreads the nations out, and he raises up a man named Shem, and Shem has offspring who eventually is Abraham. We'll get to all this. Abraham has Isaac, Isaac has Jacob, Jacob has 12 sons, one of whom is Joseph, and Joseph ends up in Egypt. That's how the people of Israel got to Egypt, and that's the story that Genesis is telling. So then we come to the book of Exodus, which, in English, Exodus means like going out, how the people of Israel left Exodus, how the people of Israel left Egypt. Except the problem is, in Hebrew, the name of Exodus is Shemot. Shemot. And Shemot is the plural of name. So Shem, remember Genesis 11, they were trying to Shem, make a name for themselves. Then there's a man named Shem who through his offspring, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph come. Then we have this book named Shemot. Shemot, meaning names. So the book is called Names. It's not called Exodus. The book is called Names. That's interesting. So in the book of Names, why would it call it Names? Well, the very first chapter of Exodus, it says these are the Shemot. These are the names of the tribes that came out of that came into Egypt, and it names all the list of the 12 tribes, and it ends by saying specifically there were 70 people that came with including Jacob and his family. This is a direct reference back to Genesis 10 and the Table of Nations. It's letting you know, just in case you didn't understand, we're continuing the same story that we had in Genesis. We're continuing it in this book called Shemot, called Names. What's also striking about Shemot is, first of all, it names all the 12 tribes. It says that there's 70 people total under those 12 tribes that come into Egypt, that get taken into Egypt, brought into Egypt, which, by the way, they weren't slaves at first, and we'll get to all that eventually. Because Joseph was second in charge in Egypt for at least a full generation. So Genesis 1, it talks about the names of the 12 tribes and how they got there in the first place. But then in Genesis 3, something really striking happens. You got the burning bush. And this is where the Most High gives Moshe, or Moses, his name. We all have seen the Prince of Egypt, I'm sure. And what happens is the Most High he speaks to Moses in a burning bush or a burning tree. We'll get to that as well. The themes and the trees and how all these Genesis imagery keeps coming up for the rest of the Bible. But God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, and Moses has all of this pushback as to why he shouldn't be the one that sets the Israelites free and all these different things. And in in Exodus chapter 3, he says, well, who should I tell the people of Israel who sent us? And he says, tell them Ahaya has sent you, which the word Ahaya is, it's the Hebrew verb to be. And he says, tell them Yahuwah, or Yahweh has sent you, which is I am that I am, or I will be who I will be. It's the covenant name that he gives the people of Israel. And he gives this to Moses to remind them. Now, what's striking about that is something has happened in the Israelite captivity to where they have forgotten who their Elohim is. They've forgotten who God is. And now he is reintroducing himself through Moses to the people of Yah, to the Israelites, but not just to the Israelites. He's also making his name known in all of Egypt. So what happens with the plagues is a war between Yahuwah, or Yahweh, the name, versus the gods, or we'll get there as well. But Yahuwah is making a name for himself, first of all, amongst his people. He is reintroduced. Something has happened to where they have forgotten who Yah is, and now he's reintroducing himself to them because of their slavery and captivity, etc. And now He also goes to war with the gods of Egypt and makes a name for himself in Egypt. Okay. Now let's look at the chapter breakdowns in the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, roughly 20% of the chapters are about Moses, which his name also obviously again, this book is called the Book of Names. We got the names of the 12 tribes in chapter 1. Then you get Exodus chapter 2, and you get the name of Moses displayed in Exodus chapter 2. How his mom hides him in a basket that's like the ark, and he goes through the waters, and specifically the reeds of the Nile, and how he gets drawn out of the water, and Pharaoh's daughter draws him out of the water and says, I'm going to name you Moses because I've drawn you from the water. So we've got an emphasis on his name and the purpose of his name. And then in chapter 3, we get the name of Yah. So that's chapters 1 through 7. We talk about Moses and slavery. That's 20% of the narrative. And then chapters 8 through 15 is roughly 20% of the narrative. That's the plagues and deliverance. Now, that's everything that we're taught about the book of Exodus. But that's only 40% of the chapters, roughly. 15 out of the 40 chapters of Exodus are about what we would call the Exodus. And then chapters 16 through 23 is all about their wilderness journey and the law, or the Torah. Interesting, about 20%. And then chapters 24 through 40 are about the covenant that Yah makes with his people and the tabernacle, all the strange details about how the tabernacle should be and how they should approach it and who gets to do what and how it all fits together, and very detailed accounts. Isn't that striking that in what we call the book of Exodus, 60% of it is not about the Exodus? 60% of it is about the wilderness, the law, the covenant, and the tabernacle. So what is Exodus actually about? Exodus is actually about, or Shemot, the book of names is actually about how the Most High is going to relate to his people and how he expects his people to relate to them. It's a reintroduction, like you might do when you exchange names with someone, right? The Most High has given them a name, specifically Yasharel, through his wrestling with Jacob. Jacob gets turned to Yasharel, or Israel, and now Yasharel has so Yasharel has this new name. How do we live now that we are this people, especially given us being set free from our captivity? And then also, how do we relate to this one who is called Yahuwah, or I am that I am, I will be that I will be? So it's this introduction, these names, how do these names relate to each other, is what the book of Exodus is all about. Then we come down to the book of Leviticus. In Hebrew, the book of Leviticus is Wayikra, which this word Yikra is the same word that the book of Genesis uses when it says, and he saw that the light was good, and he called the light day. So as the book of Genesis talks about him categorizing each one of the substances that he makes, namely light, or the expanse, or so on and so forth, he gives it a name, the day, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's the word Yikra. So Yikra just means and he called, right? So he is, again, we're dealing with these names. So we've got this book called Names, and now we've got a book called we call Leviticus, which most of the people, if you go to church, you have no idea what Leviticus means. But in Hebrew, it's Wayikra, and it means and he called. So how are people who have been given his name, who have been given a new name, how do they live like they are called by the Most High? That's what Leviticus is about. Now, that all of a sudden makes the law, or the instruction that's given in the book of Leviticus, it makes it way less boring. You go, oh, the Most High is instructing them not just for his health and not just to give them some instructions. The Most High is instructing them because he is teaching them how to live as one called by his name. Little fun fact, in the 10 Commandments, when it says, do not take the Lord's name in vain, in Hebrew, it says, do not take up the Lord's name in vain, or Yah's name. Do not take up Yah's name in vain, which means basically don't put on the name of Yah vainly. or don't make the name Yah vanity, right? So how do you not do that? Well, Leviticus tells you how. He tells you how not to take his name in vain. He tells you how not to approach him vainly, or to say, "Oh, I'm Israel," or "I am the people of God. I'm a believer. I'm saved," or whatever, and not live like it. He's giving you the standards of holiness. He's showing you how to live. Now, the book of Leviticus is really interesting because the first 7 chapters are the offerings. It gives very detailed instructions about what types of offerings are and how they should operate, et cetera, et cetera. And then chapters 8 through 10 is about the priests, how they interact with the offerings, what they wear, all those kinds of things. Then that's 8 through 15. Then chapter 16 is the Day of Atonement. It's the very center of the book of Leviticus. Now, you see here, I have this word here, chiastic center of the Torah. Well, a chiasm is a chiasm is a Hebrew poetic literary device, just like rhyming, cat, hat, bat, sat, and you know what's happening in the poem because of the rhyme. Well, with the Israelites, it wasn't really rhyming. There was a lot of different devices that were used, and one of the key ones is this thing called a chiasm. And in a chiasm, what happens is the poem builds up to the main point and then resolves from the main point. So you know what the main point is by finding what the dead center of the thing is. And the dead center of Leviticus is the Day of Atonement, where you get these 2 goats. One cleans well, we'll get there eventually too, but in the Day of Atonement, you get these 2 goats. One of the goats cleans the temple, and one of the goats gets sent out what's called toward or to Azazel. We'll get to all that eventually, but that's the very center of the book of Leviticus. And when you take a step back, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Leviticus is the very center of the Torah. So Leviticus is the chiastic center of the whole book structure. And then the Day of the Atonement is the very center of the very center. It's one of the apex points that the Most High is making in the Torah happens in the Day of Atonement. It's important. In chapters 17 through 20, there's these things about holiness, and that you see this A, B, C, B, A structure. That's the chiastic structure. And chapters, this is all pretty rough. It's not precisely this verse and whatever. I could be more precise, but I was trying to get my head around the big picture. And in the big picture of things, the feasts and the times correlate with the offerings. The holiness precepts and statutes correlate with the priests. And in the very center is the Day of Atonement. Then we come to the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers is interesting because the Hebrew name for, first of all, why is it called the book of Numbers? I didn't really know. I was a pastor, had gone through seminary, and I didn't really know. And then I look at it in Hebrew, and the book of Numbers is called Ba Midbar. And if you look at this prefix, Ba, it's the same prefix from over here, Ba Midbar, in the beginning, except this time it does have the definite article. So Ba Midbar, Midbar means wilderness, in the wilderness. The book of Numbers in Hebrew is called In the Wilderness, which makes a lot of sense because the entirety of the book of Numbers, they are wandering around the wilderness. Excuse me. So Genesis, how it all started, how this family got started, how the world got messed up, and God is going to use this family to redeem the world. Then Exodus, or Shemot, the names, now how basically where we came from, the situation we were in, and how this reintroduction between the Most High and his people happened. He brings them out of Egypt, and then he starts in the wilderness. He starts teaching them the law, and he starts showing them how they are to live as those called by the Most High. Then the book of Numbers, we get the narrative of them, they're journeying in the wilderness, right, before they ever go into the promised land. So these, again, are rough estimations, but in chapters 1 through 13, they go from camping in the wilderness to this place called Kadesh. The word Kadesh in Hebrew means holy. Interesting. So the book of Numbers is symmetrical. You get 33% of the narrative is about them going from camping in a place called holiness, or Kadesh, And then you get 14 through 25 details of them failing at a place called holiness. Interesting. Israel failing in a place called holiness, and then them having to wander, and the wandering that followed their failure. And they wandered and wandered and wandered, and a whole generation has to die out. And then 26 through 36 is this new generation, and they're prepping for the promised land. So essentially, what is Numbers about, or Ba Midbar in the wilderness about? It's about their journey in the wilderness. They go from camping, having crossed the Sea of Reeds. They go from camping to this place called Kadesh. They fail at a place called Kadesh and are forced to wander. And then after wandering in this place called Kadesh, they're finally getting prepped for the promised land. That's what the book of Numbers, or Ba Midbar in the wilderness, is about. It's about them being in the wilderness. And then if you didn't understand that that's what it was about, when we get to the book of Deuteronomy, the first words of Deuteronomy was, these are the instructions that happened in the wilderness. Like, oh, okay, this is all making sense. The whole narrative is beginning to crystallize a little bit more. And in the book of Deuteronomy, the Hebrew word for the book of Deuteronomy is dabarim. Dabarim. And dabarim means word or speeches. I'm sorry, words or speeches. That I am ending is just a plural. So dabarim, words or speeches. And what is the book of Dabarim? It is to this new generation. They've come out of Egypt. They've wandered. They've received the law. They failed a whole lot through the book of Numbers. Now they're finally ready to go into the promised land. But Moses is not going with them through some trials that had happened. So he is instructed to give them these basically final words of preparation as they're about to enter into the promised land. And Dabarim, or words or speeches, this book called Speeches, is 8 speeches. The first speech, chapter 1 through 4, basically functions as one speech. Then chapters 4 through 26 is the second speech. So 66% of the book is the second speech that happens. And then chapter 27 through 28 is the third speech, and many people know about Deuteronomy 28. And then chapter 29 and 30 is another speech, and in chapter 30, that's where we get after these things have happened to you, the blessing and the curse. Then when you return to me, then I will put all of those curses upon your enemies, and I'm going to restore you and make you flourish in the land and all that. And then chapter 30, 31 is a speech, 32 is a speech, 33 is I believe that's a song, and then 34 is a speech, and that's how it ends. So it's 8 speeches. Deuteronomy is 8 speeches. So that's the book of, that's the Torah. In the beginning, these names, God calls, and he called these people to be a people. What does it mean to be called? He gives them the standards of what it means to be called by him. Then they wander around in the wilderness. Then after a whole generation dies off, now they're finally ready to go into the promised land. So Moses, by the instruction of the Most High, gives them these 8 speeches, and now they're ready for the book of Joshua to go in, to conquer the promised land, and to establish themselves. And we're off to the races. So this is Torah. So as I was asking the question, what is Torah, and what does it mean? What does it mean to be given the law? You know, Paul talks a lot about the law and what the law can do and what it can't do. And I started to realize it might be better to call it God's instruction than it is to even call it his law. Not because it's less important or it's less serious, but because it makes more sense. God cares about you. Yah cares about you. So he's giving you these instructions. He's not giving you law like a cop. He's giving you instructions like a father. So what is Torah about? What is his instruction about? It's about a family called out of the chaos. It's about a family that went through slavery, has been delivered. And it's about the creation of a new society centered on the Most High Yah, which is why this little chiastic device is used in Leviticus, and Leviticus as the chiasm of the Torah exists. The reason it's like this is because you're supposed to know all of these things are about how to rebuild society as centered on the Most High Yah. So it's about the creation of a family that comes out of slavery through the mighty hand of the Most High, his intent to create a new society centered on him, teaching them how to live as though they've been called. Right? It's like a parent when you go out to go out to dinner, and you say to your kids, act like you know how to act. Right? This is what Leviticus is about, because my name is on you. My shem, my reputation is on you. So you've got to act, you got to live like you know how to act. And then you got so him teaching them how to live as though they're called. Their failure in the wilderness, it's very honest about who the people of Israel are. And then Deuteronomy is about their preparation for living in the land. I'm going to give you this land, and this land is crazy good land. It's filled with mountains and rivers and green grass, etc. It's a fruitful land. Its hills are made of copper, or its mountains are made of copper, and its hills of iron. You don't need anything from anybody else. I'm giving you the perfect land, the best land. So now I'm going to give you instructions. Deuteronomy is essentially, I'm giving you instructions on when you get in there, how to stay in there, because the reason the people are being displaced, that you're going to be kicking out, is because the land is vomiting them up. They've lived so abhorrently in there that it's time for them to go. We'll get to that when it comes. Obviously, we know that the people of Israel don't stay in that land because they fail at really all of the points that are made in Deuteronomy, all of the law. They break all of it. And this is why, essentially, on down the line, Yahusha, or Jesus, has to come, and he not only instructs us, but he functions as the greater Israel who follows and keeps the law perfectly. And now when we trust in him, his blood covers us. All of these things are the seeds of all of these things are all throughout the Torah. In fact, it's really hard to understand the New Testament without having a decent grasp of Torah. There's certain things that Jesus says, that Jesus does, that you just cannot quite fully get if you don't know how the Torah works. That's a 30,000-foot view of what Torah is, what the instructions that God is giving is. It's the instructions to a family, and they're called to be a priest, a family of priests to the nations, and to eventually bring the nations back in redemption. And their subsequent failure comes after that. So it's this is the contract that the Most High is given to his people. So I hope you find that helpful. If there are questions, if there's things that I didn't cover that you wish I had, or if you're curious about why I have certain perspectives on things, please engage with the content, like, comment, subscribe, put on the bell notification, all that stuff. We're going to continue to. I've already got 50 talks in the tuck that will be that I plan on releasing. Whether I get 2 views on the channel or 200,000. I plan on releasing these just to have them out there for those that might find it helpful. So like, comment, subscribe, and ask questions, or respectfully challenge if that's what you feel you should do. So blessings. May the God, Romans 15:13, may the God of hope fill you with joy and peace in believing, so that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen, and see you later.